Okay, so we now welcome on the Power of the Towel podcast, part of the Nucks Misconduct network of podcasts. Our guest today is a writer for the Nucks Misconduct website. He also writes for Canucks Army, Noah Strang. Noah, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Nick.
Not a problem, man. Let's get to that right away. Okay, you write for Nucks Misconduct, the website. You write for Canucks Army, the website. Gun to your head, pick a side, man. Like we can't have you on both sides of the fence. Like pick a side. Like who are you gonna write for from now on? Make a decision right now.
Well, Nucks Misconduct was the first one, so let me write for them. So always have a good place for them and always be loyal.
Okay, you always remember your first. That's what they say, right?
Exactly.
But so, what are you working on for Nucks Misconduct like right now? Any articles coming up?
I'm trying to think of an article right now. I'm gonna do something around, the team's in a tough spot right now, and I think a lot of that has to do with the defense and more specifically kind of the defensive systems that the team is operating in right now. So I'm trying to take a closer look at that and see what can be changed to really get the season back around. Because from a long-term point of view, I think there are a lot of changes that can be made. But from a short-term point of view in this season, what can be done to get the team back on the right track?
Yeah, it's interesting. And let's start with the defense there, I guess. What the hell can this team do to improve their defense other than make a trade at some point and try and move around the blue line around that? Because outside of like making a trade, I think this team's just going to be bad defensively the rest of the season, and we're just going to have to accept it. And hopefully we can, the team can figure out a way to win in spite of its defense.
For sure, for sure. And even last year they were poor defensively, and this year just really gone to another level. Even though entering the season, I think a lot of people expected them to be better in that area. Nate Schmidt came in the offseason. A lot of people expected big things out of him, and a lot of young players stepping into roles. And they've even gotten worse than last season. I think that's a troubling sign. And moving forward, finding some way to fix that this season, whether it's shuffling the pairings, making a trade, though I think that's kind of a last resort, or perhaps just altering their philosophy will be crucial to start winning some more games.
Okay, so what does that mean? Like altering their philosophy, like just not be as aggressive on the forecheck, stay back a bit. Like what tangibly? Okay, by the way, we're recording this on Monday afternoon, right before the Leafs game tonight. What tangibly can this team do to improve their defense? Like what can they do tonight to actually improve their defensive effort?
I think to me, it starts with a little bit of a defense first mentality. And that's not something that you want to say considering this team has so many offensive weapons and is so talented moving forward. But we've seen that they cannot outscore these issues. This isn't an issue that can be outscored. And so I think the forwards helping out the defense more, staying in the zone. Some of these goals just look like miscommunication. And I think moving forward, more time together, it'll start to clear up. But I think really the biggest thing is making sure that you're doing your job in your own zone. You have your responsibility. I think like Bill Belichick with the New England Patriots, he's famous for do your job. And the Canucks need a bit of that right now, where everyone just needs to know what their role is and just execute that.
Okay, that's interesting. So more on the player side, just maybe simplify it, so to say.
For sure, for sure. I think that'd be good way to say it.
And you bring up a good point as well. This team cannot outscore their defensive issues, and I think that's a good point because, again, the top the lotto line especially hasn't been that great this season. You may have to switch to a more defensive style. But my point to that, my counterpoint to that is, does this team even have the personnel to play a more defensive style? Like we've talked about in this market about like players like Jake Virtanen and Adam Gaudette and their deficiencies defensively. And if we're talking about it, and I'm sure Travis Green and his coaching staff have talked about it a lot more in depth than we have. So I'm sure Travis Green would love to just trap it up starting tonight and grind out 2-1 wins if he can. I just don't think they have the players to do that.
No, I agree with you there. And that's a larger issue here where the personnel doesn't match up to the system that they need to play to win games. But the thing is, if you're an NHL player, there's not defensive players on the Canucks to play a trapping style. But if you're in the NHL, you should be able to play strong enough defense that the team is conceding 5 goals every night. You're not conceding multiple odd man rushes every night. It's not about being an excellent defensive team, it's about being okay. And I think any player in the NHL can get to an okay defensive level.
Yeah, and I think even if the Canucks get to an okay defensive level, if that's even possible, I think that we'll see, a change in results this season. But some of this defensive effort, like from the forwards, has been horrendous. Like JT Miller, like my God, I'm a JT Miller stan. I've said on this podcast before, he's the most important player on this Vancouver Canucks in terms of what he does for that lot line, what he does on the power play on the half wall. This guy is maybe he may not be the best player. This is a good sports talk radio debate. He might not be the best player, but maybe the most important player on the Vancouver Canucks. And I've been disappointed with him this season, especially that last game against the Leafs where Austin Matthews is streaking towards the net and he just kind of like pulls the old controller disconnected defense. Like he just kind of fades away and lets Austin Matthews go in and score. And you saw that exchange between Braden Holtby and JT Miller. Like Holtby was not happy. I don't know what he said. I don't think it's come out, but I'm sure he said something like, what the hell, man? Like you just let this guy go to the net. And you can see the visual reaction of Holtby looking at the bench and shaking his head like, what the fuck is this? What the fuck's going on? By the way, you can swear on this podcast. What the fuck's going on? Like, is this ridiculous that, we talk about team defense and, everyone doing their job. The effort level for some of these players on the defensive side of the puck has to improve.
I agree. And effort should be a given. It should be something
Yes.
that needs to be asked. And right now it's not. And that's really disappointing. I think you mentioned the exchange between Holtby and Miller. And Holtby's a guy that's won a Stanley Cup. He's been on good teams. He knows what it takes to be a good team. And none of these young core players have really, last year's playoff run was great, but have really been part of a successful program for multiple years and really know what it takes to do it year after year and be successful. Because that's hard to do in the NHL. And so that's why I think management's clearly placed an emphasis on players that have experience, that know what it takes to win. And there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect right now with that on the whole team, with the whole team stepping up and just giving a shit when it matters.
Yeah, the give a shit meter is very low right now, and I hate to bring up JT Miller again. Everyone knows how much of a JT Miller stan I am, but at the same time, like it's one thing to give the puck up, and giveaways are going to happen. You're going to give the puck away in hockey, like that's going to happen. But at least like try and give a shit getting the puck back. And we can even go back to last week against Montreal. There's a couple of times I can't remember if it was the first game or the second game in Montreal. All these games are starting to blur together at some point because they're just getting blown out in each one of these games against these Eastern teams outside of Ottawa. But he gave the puck over and he just didn't give a fuck afterwards. So it's like, dude, like you have to try at least get the puck back.
I agree. I think seeing a teammate do that, it rubs off on the entire team. It brings down morale. And that's also a product of just all these bad losses in a row. But effort is kind of a cliche, but it's something you can control and something that needs to be seen out of these players.
And moving on now, I'm going to steal this question. I'm going to sort of, change this question up from what Jamie Dodd asked me when I was on Sports at 650. I'll give you three options right now. You can rank them from most to blame to least to blame in the situation the Vancouver Canucks are in. Coach Travis Green, General Manager Jim Benning, or the ownership group. Rank from, let's say, least to blame to most to blame where the Canucks are in this current situation. Who is the least and most to blame?
I think the least to blame is Travis Green. Now, some people might point to the players kind of looking disorganized out there or just the shot attempts that they've been allowing. But when you look at what he's been handed, I don't think he's getting a fair shot compared to someone like Jim Benning, who will be on my most to blame. So I'll go Travis Green, least to blame, the ownership group in the middle, and Jim Benning, most to blame. I think that if I can speak about the Jim Benning a bit, he's had 7 years here now. And while he has done good things, it's not like it's been all bad. Overall, the full body of work, just this is the final product of 7 years. It's not anything that's nearly good enough. And that's why I would put most of the blame with him. And then the ownership group in the middle, I think they have something to do with it as well. will building a vision for the franchise, but they are the ones that selected Benning to fulfill that vision, and I don't think he's done a good job of it.
Yeah, that's a. I would say Travis. I would rank it pretty much in the exact same order. I think Travis Green, again, he would love to play a more defensive style. He would. I'm sure he would trap it up starting yesterday if he could. He just doesn't have the players to do it. And I think with every coach, you have to consider there's a baseline. There's a ceiling every roster has. There's like a baseline that roster can get to. And I mean, Travis Green can't turn the clock back on Alex Edler 7 years. He can't make Tyler Myers all of a sudden a better defensive, have better defensive awareness and become a better skater. He can't turn like Jay Beagle into a competent, fourth line center. And Jay Beagle, not to say he's the most to blame, but he has the roster to coach. He doesn't. He is given this roster to coach, and he's doing, I think, the best he can given the circumstances. Ownership, I mean, yeah, it's in the middle. They're not entirely to blame, but they do have some sort of blame. They could have moved on from Jim Benning earlier if they didn't like it. Like, let's not forget, he got like 2 different contract extensions in a short period of time. Like, they got to sign off on that. Jim Benning's not making, like, he's not a dictator. He has bosses to respond to, and it has to be, the blame has to lie on Jim Benning. You said it. He's been here for 7 years. This is his roster. The only holdover I can think of is Alex Edler, right? Like, he was the guy. He's the only guy left from that Gillis regime, and Gilson even drafted him. That was a Dave Nonis draft pick, right? So Jim Benning, it's time for him to move on. It's time to move on from Jim Benning. Now, whether you want to fire him midseason, I don't think that's realistic given the situation with COVID and how you're going to interview people, with a 14-day quarantine and what have you. But this is Jim Benning's roster. These are his players. These are his draft. These are his prospects. It's time for Jim Benning to go, in my opinion. We've seen enough. We have seen enough. And I think you're seeing a reaction online accordingly. People who have been fervent Benning defenders are starting to say it's probably time to move on from this guy.
For sure. I mean, you only get so many chances, and really, he's used up all the chances by this point. And last year, coming into this year, this is supposed to be the years where the team is contending, or at least starting to look like a contender, and that's not the case. And so I think you need to move on and find someone that can take this roster from where it is right now, from promising to actually realizing some of that potential and turning it into a good team. And
Yeah. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, I think that revolves a lot around the players around the core, because obviously Benning's built this core here, but he's done a terrible job of building around that core. And so someone that can do that needs to come in and execute that plan.
Yeah, and we've discussed this before in this podcast. Being a GM is not only signing the good players and drafting the top end talent. It's about the moves around the margins as well. Like, you have to be able to find value in kind of small places in the corners that maybe another GM isn't looking. And you said it hasn't been all bad. You can't say a team that drafted Elias Pettersson with the 5th overall pick, Quinn Hughes with like the 7th, 8th overall pick, Brock Besser in the late first round, even a guy like Nils Hoglander in the 2nd round. Sully Podkolzin looks good. I don't know when he is going to be coming over, but he looks like he's going to be a solid NHL second line player. Like, it hasn't been all bad, but at the same time, you can't look at the cap situation the Canucks are in and say, this is a guy we can trust with building a consistent contender going forward, in my opinion.
For sure. And I think moving into this next stage of the Canucks, where they're going to have to hand out some bigger deals to those core players, it's really going to come down to maximizing dollars for the people around them. And that is an area where Benning has proven that he's inept. He's giving out these huge deals to these players are supposed to complement the core, and most of them, if not all of them, have been total busts. And I think that while he's been great at drafting, that's not what the team needs anymore. And so it's time to move on.
Yeah, that's a good point about the drafting. Like, he had a reputation coming in as a good talent evaluator. And I think for the most part, he's sort of proven that with, Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser. Like, we can debate if Jim Benning really wanted Elias Pettersson in the 2017 draft, we're always going to have that debate. But you're right. I think that's a good point. It's time to get someone, I think, who can find value to complement the core, because after this year, Elias Patterson's going to make a shit ton of money. Same with Quinn Hughes. You need to find, value wherever you can to maximize those two talents and to be a consistent Stanley Cup contender. Like, look at the Washington Capitals. Look how long it took that core to win a Stanley Cup. What, Ovechkin was drafted like 2004, and they've been kind of a consistent playoff team since 08. It took them 10 years. It took them 10 years of constantly, retooling and kind of trotting that group out there to finally break through. It's unrealistic, I think, to be like basketball, where you can have like a 3-year run with a really good team and, maybe we can win a cup. It's got to be longer than that. You got to build in hockey. You got to build a team that can knock on the door for like 8-10 years.
I agree with you. I agree with you for sure. And one thing that's mentioned a lot is taking advantage of, as an example, this year where both Petey and Quinn would be on their entry level deals the last years. And people talk a lot about how the last year of entry level deals for your stars is a great time to push all in. And in theory, it is, because you have some of your best players on the team for very cheap. But the reality is that mostly teams that win cups, it's after, like you mentioned, the Washington Capitals, many years of having their window open.
Yes.
And so I think that while like the entry level contracts for your best players seems so great, it's just not a reality that can be trusted or depended upon. I don't know the last team that did that. Maybe Chicago or Pittsburgh, one of those early ones. But if you look at the teams that win cups, it's guys that have pushed over and over and over, and they finally, get over the hump as a group. And so I think the Canucks have that group that's ready to push, and then they need to be able to figure out ways, like as we mentioned before, to complement it and start going for playoff run.
Yeah, and just one more point before we move on here. I've noticed a trend this season for the Canucks, and let me know what you think of this. The teams that have just absolutely pumped the Canucks this season, the Torontos, the Montreals, even the Calgarys, these are teams with depth. These are teams that can roll out 3 to 4 lines and really take it to you on every shift, right? And to me, that screams this is a roster problem, not a coaching problem. If this team can't match the depth of those, of those teams like the Torontos and Montreals, I would say like the Canucks have better top end talent than Montreal, right? Like, the thing with Montreal is they've got like 3 essentially second lines, like 3 really good second lines and a fourth line that can get just run over you. And in Toronto, it's kind of a similar situation. Like, they got really good high end talent, but at least they have competent depth that aren't dragging you down on the bottom half. So to me, when the teams that have depth are pumping you, and the teams you are beating are the teams like yourself, like the Edmontons and Winnipegs, that are very top heavy with no real depth, that is a roster problem, not a coaching problem. That lies on the guy putting together the roster more than the person coaching that roster.
I agree with you. I mean, your best players can only play 20, 25 minutes a night, not even half the game. And so you're going to be forced to ice lots of players. I think you look at Edmonton, they probably have a case even worse than Vancouver does. And it just proves that you can't win in this league with only a few studs. You need to have good players throughout your entire roster. And at the moment, that's something that the Canucks don't really have.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of the Canucks studs this season, the lotto line, what the hell's going on? Like, the Canucks needed this lotto line, the top line, Elias Pettersson, Brock Besser, JT Miller, to be all world once again. If they were have any chance of repeating what they did last year, and it hasn't been that way so far. Like, they've been substandard this entire season for the most part. They've been okay on the power play. They got a power play goal last game, but at 5-on-5 especially, I don't think they've been that great this year. Like, what the hell is wrong with these guys?
Yeah, they've been getting caved in at 5-on-5. And as you mentioned, the Canucks rely on that line for so much of their scoring. And when it's not working, it results in games like we've been seeing. And it's hard to really pinpoint what's wrong with the line. I can't tell you exactly like this is what needs to be changed to get this line going back together. But I would say there's clearly a lot of frustration. They all expect better of themselves as well. You see all the players on the Canucks, but especially I think guys like Pettersson, Miller, really expect a lot of themselves and haven't been producing. They're just as frustrated as all the fans are. and they're trying to figure it out too. So I think with time, it'll come.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think they have, what am I trying to say? They they want to be better, and they want to be, they hold themselves to a higher standard essentially. And it's hard to fathom these guys are going through such a bad streak that they are now, right? Like we saw them last year, they were amazing, or one of the best lines in hockey. And to see him like just fall off a cliff like this is just very strange. And I see Travis Green trying to, jig up the lines. He's trying to spark something. But I think for the most part, I don't think that's going to work. I think if the Canucks have any success of turning this around, they gotta they gotta get that line going, which means just keeping them together until they figure it out.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part is that with the shortened season, they're not really given much time to figure it out. A couple bad games, and already the Canucks are going to be chasing to get in the playoff spot. And if this keeps on going, they're only digging themselves a deeper hole. So in a regular season, the regular 82 game season, they might have a few more chances to work through this slump. But in this shortened season, already a quarter done, they're not really afforded that time. And so I think that's why there's more pressure on Travis to switch up the lines. There's more pressure on all those players to break through these slumps. And when you're in a slump, pressure doesn't help.
Yeah, and we've talked about the runway before on this show. The Canucks have the fourth lowest point percentage in the National Hockey League right now. Like they're around the Ottawa Detroit level. Like that's not good. That's not competition. That's not, that's not the company you want to be in, right? Like that's
Yeah.
that's not good. And the runway, we've talked about the runway. The runway is a lot shorter in a 56 game season when you're playing 6 teams than the traditional 82 game season that we're used to, right? Like they've played 13, 14 games, but again, the point percentage is really low, and all these teams have games in hand. So, this upcoming 4 game stretch against Calgary is huge, because if you're taking points off them, and those are Calgary's games in hand on you, that's imperative you get results. And if I feel like a broken record, because I said this last episode as well, they got to win like 2 of 3 against Toronto and like hold serve against Montreal. That's not happening. So you legit probably have to sweep the Calgary Flames if you want to cement a playoff spot, because again, it's looking like the 4th spot or nothing for the Canucks.
No, I agree. And I think right now the Canucks are really going to be battling already. It's sad that it's this early in the season, but like you said, they're battling for the 4th spot against Edmonton, Winnipeg. And so I think getting games off those teams, Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, though they haven't done that at all, getting games off those teams and getting those games back in hand will be crucial, so that when they do play Edmonton and Winnipeg, they just have to beat those teams, and they know that they're not going to be hampered by the fact that they couldn't beat any of the teams above them.
Yeah, and we said it last episode when we had Nav Dosanjh of the Larchcast on. It's just about being better than the Oilers, the Jets, and the Sens. Because I think it's going to be one of Toronto, Montreal, Calgary winning the division. The other 2 are going to finish 2 and 3. So you have to be better than Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa. And I think, Ottawa is pretty straightforward. I think they could be better than Ottawa. They sure as hell better be. But in terms of, Winnipeg and Edmonton, I mean, they played Winnipeg without Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Laine was already traded, so he wasn't even there. So I don't know. Like if I'm a gambling man, which I am, I don't know if I would put the Canucks as the favorite for that 4th spot. I'd put probably Winnipeg, because I like their top 6 and I like their goaltending more than Edmonton. And needless to say, the Canucks, their defense, it may be on paper, it may look about the same as Winnipeg, but they're not playing the same.
No, I agree with you. And coming into the season, I think many expected the Canucks to be much better than they are, obviously. And so we know the Canucks can play better than they currently are. There's something about the team right now. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what it was. Obviously, these defensive issues, but there's still hope to turn this around, because we've seen when the Canucks are clicking and when they're playing well, how good of a team they can be. And that team, when the Canucks are clicking, makes the playoffs in this Canadian division. Not the team that's playing right now, but when they're going. And so I think getting back to that is obviously crucial. And then trying to match, like you said, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and get points off of them every time they play, so that when it comes down to it, they have those points in hand.
Man, we're already like approaching the point in the season. Like it's an extended death march. Like I think in any other season, Jim Benning would be gone by now, but you can't really interview anyone because of COVID. Travis Green doesn't have a contract, so it's going to be easy for ownership to move on from him. And if they want a totally new direction, it's just weird that we're already, 14 games in, 40 something games left, and we're already talking about the Canucks, having to win these games. And, it's almost, we're on the precipice right now of extended Canucks death march.
For sure, for sure. It's almost a couple more games like the Canucks are playing right now. It's gonna be time to start the lottery simulators.
Oh,
And
I'm not looking forward to that, man. I'm not looking for lottery simulators. Like, I don't even think, is the 2021 even draft even good? I'm gonna have to like brush up again. I thought honestly after last year, I thought it was done with
yeah,
like the lottery simulator and prospects and being a self-described YouTube scout. I thought it was
yeah,
done with all that, man. Like, I don't want to go back there.
exactly. And but if the Canucks keep playing like they do right now, then it looks like that. So I think this season it's something like we've never seen before, and it's at such a quick pace. All these games happening one after another, that the team really, once you get stuck in this kind of state or mentality that they're in right now, I think it's tough to get out of. But I hope that getting back to Vancouver will hopefully give them a little bit of a reset and a chance to get right before the Calgary series.
Yeah, and I know Kelly Rudy got clowned on Hockey Night in Canada for this take. Like you were suggesting like Bo Horvat take up Elias Pettersson to Squamish or something like that, which is not allowed with the COVID restrictions. But he's got a point. Like if you're like there's no real time for team building activities in this COVID season because everyone's in their own hotel room and they can't really do anything like that, right?
For sure. And I think another thing Travis Green mentioned was practices. They haven't really had a chance to practice.
Yes, they practiced today though. We're recording this on Monday. They practiced today, so maybe that helps.
Yeah, hopefully that helps because I think some of the issues are so glaring, kind of systematic issues that where players just are not picking up the right guys or the other team's just easily moving through the Canucks defense, that just getting back to a practice where they can all get a better feel for where they're going to be on the ice and where Travis wants them to be, and letting Travis get maybe a little bit more instruction will be really helpful moving forward.
Yeah, and I'm sure like that's another impact of the COVID season is no real practice time. I'm sure Travis Green would love to put these guys through their paces and get a good bag skate in. And I don't know if they're even allowed to bag skate players anymore, but put them through their paces and work on defensive zone coverage. And they haven't really been able to do that because of the COVID season. So yeah, that's going to help. So let's talk about bright spots. And the only bright spot I can think of for this Canucks season is so far at least is Nils Hoglander. I've loved his game. He's 5'9". He's like a fire hydrant. Like he's like my height, but weighs 25 more pounds. Probably just pure muscle. This guy's a beast. I love him. Has he been the only bright spot for you this Canucks season? Because now looking at it, it's just this team's obviously taken a step back, like many predicted. But Nils Hoglander has been awesome.
For sure. He's been a huge positive surprise, and I think he's exceeded everyone's expectations, and he's really helped solidify that top six. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that it was all about Jake Virtanen stepping into the top six on the top line.
That looks stupid now.
Yeah, exactly. And Hoglander is completely, no one's bringing that back up now. And it's almost a little amazing to me how quickly he's just taking that spot and made it his. No one else is really stepping in there. I know they brought in Erickson into the top six last game, but Hoglander on this roster moving forward just helps add to the offensive firepower up front and just helps add to this young core. It's another player that the Canucks know they have moving forward he's looked to me like a stud so far. And I think that you can never have too many of those pieces. So it's been a huge positive surprise.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Lou Erickson back in the top six. I think Travis Green quickly realized that he made a mistake because Hoglander, he was on the quote unquote third line to start the game. He ended up with more ice time than Lou Erickson. So I think he realized quickly that Travis Green realized quickly that he made a pretty big mistake putting Lou Erickson back at top six. I think you got to staple Hoglander on that wing with Bo Horvat the rest of the season. Like we've said, I don't know how many times I've said on this podcast, but Nils Hoglander can unlock Bo Horvat on 5-on-5. We know how good Bo Horvat is on the power play. We know how good he is on that bumper spot, even though teams are keying in on him now. If Nils Hoglander can make Bo Horvat even that much of a goal scorer, even better goal scorer at 5-on-5, then it's worth keeping him in on that line, right?
I agree. I agree 100%. And Hoglander, he's so good at retrieving the puck. It's something that's mentioned a lot, but he's so good at retrieving the puck and along the boards. And him and Horvat and Pearson have already showed great chemistry. And there hasn't really been, to me, a downside. That line's been strong at 5-on-5 at driving play. It's been the Canucks' best line by far. And Hoglander's not getting exposed defensively or anything like that. He looks really mature for his age. And so I don't see any reason why you wouldn't keep those players together because to me, they've been the best line on the Canucks so far.
Yeah, and another thing for Niels Hoglander going forward, he's going to be a cheap contract that's actually surplus value as the numbers inclined like to say surplus value for the next 2 seasons, right? Like this season, obviously, and then the next 2 seasons, whatever they look like, he's gonna have surplus value, which is huge for a team that's paying Louis Eriksson $6 million a year and Sven Baertschi $3 million to play in Utica. Like you need these kind of wins, and hopefully they can have another one if it's Silipod Colson. But at least for now,
Yeah, but I mean, having
Niels
those,
Niels Hoglander is going to be surplus value for this team.
100%. I mean, he's under $1 million and he's taking
Yeah.
a top six role, which means, those extra dollars, the Canucks are right now using them on overpaying bottom six guys. But as those contracts come up, they'll be able to use those extra dollars in hopefully better ways than they are right now. A couple extra $1 million to beef up the defense or maybe just get better bottom six players.
Yeah, and whoever the next GM is, it's weird we're already talking about Jim Benning gonna, the next GM, but it feels like it's gone to that point. Like it's just a matter of time, I think, before Jim Benning is gone. Like I can't see Francesco Aquilini. Like this guy he's not I almost want to say foreign owner like soccer, but he's he lives in this city. He lived in this city pretty much his whole life. I know he's been a Canucks fan for however long they've been in the National Hockey League. Like this guy hears what people are talking about online. They fired Mike Gillis for a similar situation, right? To protect the brand. I was reading an article, I think it was Pierre LeBrun for ESPN or TSN back when Mike Gillis was fired back in 2014. And they fired him, quote, to protect the brand. And the brand has not been any worse as of right now, in my opinion, since then. Maybe you could go back to the dark days of Willie D. But like he has to see the reaction going on online and see the situation the Canucks are in cap wise and change has to come. So it's going to be huge for whoever the next GM is. Again, we're talking about the next GM already, but it's kind of where we're at with the Canucks. The next guy who comes in, he has to clean up the bottom six somehow, and he has to get surplus value out of the bottom six, or at least hold serve with the bottom six and not have it tie down the cap.
Yeah, and whoever's going to walk in, as far as new GM jobs go, this Canucks one's going to look pretty good. A lot of the work of finding these top end elite players has already been done. So this guy's not going to be walking into a situation where he has to completely rebuild the team. He's walking into a situation where he needs to take them from a promising team to a good team. And so I think that will kind of attract a lot of good candidates, hopefully.
Yeah, and it's a Canadian market, so if you're an ambitious guy looking to make a name for yourself, what better place than Vancouver? You can imagine being the GM who brings the cup for the first time to Vancouver. You'd be a god. Like no, everyone would be buying you drinks at bars. Like you'd have streets named after you. Babies would be named after you. Like you'd be the king here.
Yeah, well, Gillis didn't even win a Stanley Cup. His name still comes up anytime the Canucks
Yeah.
lose a game. So yeah, for sure. If you were the guy that brought the cup here, you'd be a legend.
Did you find it weird, like I do, that everyone keeps on bringing up Mike Gillis's name? 7 years after he was gone, in terms of like, oh, the Canucks, have a potential GM vacancy. Let's bring back Mike Gillis. Like, is there any other hockey market that is obsessed with like a former GM as much as the Vancouver Canucks are?
I know it is a bit strange. I think it just shows how kind of desperate for success this fan base is, and that really the last taste of success was when Gillis was here, and so those two things get correlated. It's like we want to get back to success, and Gillis was the one that brought it here, and So I think that's kind of why they always bring it up. But it is really strange that this old GM just always has his name brought up to come back. Like people don't remember that. There's a reason why these people get fired, you know?
Yeah. Well, it would be interesting if he does come back, because that means like some sort of reputation has been repaired and a relationship has been mended. But
Yeah.
Mike Gillis, like, are Florida fans pissed off that Dale Talon's gone? Like, I don't know. I know Dale Talon's like Mike Gillis is obviously going to be was a much better general manager than Dale Talon was in his tenure in Florida. But it just maybe I don't pay attention to other hockey markets as much as I do the Canucks. I just find it strange that when the GM opening is now apparently there for the Vancouver Canucks, everyone's like, bring back Gillis, bring back Gillis. Can we not find someone else? Is there not like, I like the assistant GM for Colorado, Chris McFarland. He'd be top of my list. Like, look at what he's done with Joe Sakic in Colorado. They're going to be a great team for the next number of years.
Yeah, for sure. I think like taking anyone from that Colorado group would be amazing. They've done a terrific job there, obviously. And I think back to the Gillis point a little bit, like this isn't even a guy that's gone on from his Canucks days and gone to another team and rebuilt them into a contender as well. You know what I mean? Like he's not a guy that has shown proven success, track records at multiple spots, but still Canucks fans keep mentioning his name and vying for him.
Okay,
And
well, let's stop the Gillis talk, because there's going to be some Gillis stands who listen to this podcast and are going to tweet at me. I already know that's going to happen. The goaltending situation. Braden Holtby, we're recording this Monday afternoon. Braden Holtby is going to get the start. And it seems like Thomas Drance reported essentially a big reason why they're starting Holtby in this game is what happened Saturday night with after that fourth goal by Austin Matthews. The reaction, they seemed like they want to give him another chance and the team another chance to correct that wrong and avenge what happened on that ice, because it was not a good look for the Canucks. In terms of the goaltending situation, I think Demko should be the starter going forward. I think, this team has too much questions everywhere else to have another question being goaltending. And if you could solidify Demko being your number one goalie for the next few seasons, you got to do it as soon as you can.
yeah, I've been a bit more impressed with Demko's plays so far than Holtby's. And I think that the plan was always have Demko be the goalie of the future for this core. And that's being realized at the moment as we speak, and he's stepping into a larger role. Neither goalie has been unreal, but none of them are the problem either. Goaltending isn't the problem with this Canucks team at the moment. And so if the coach feels like the team will play harder to kind of right that wrong for Braden Holtby, then I guess that's his decision. But I do agree with you that moving forward, I think Demko should get the majority of the starts and to really solidify himself as number one. I think it'll also add a little bit of kind of consistency for the team that's lacking one at the moment.
Yeah, and it goes to show, I think the whole Travis Green not having a contract has been kind of buried a bit with now that we have actual talkie to talk about. But it's a big story because of situations like this. Like Travis Green, this is the last year of his coaching deal. He may not, who knows if he gets another deal. He doesn't have that assurance yet. He's going to make moves that are win now and really don't consider the future, right? Like if he had a contract extension before this season, I can see a situation where he does play Demko more because he knows this guy is going to be a big part of his team going forward, but he doesn't have that incentive now. He just knows that if he wants to continue being a coach in the National Hockey League, he's got to keep winning games. And if that means playing Holtby over Thatcher Demko, if that means, putting Louis Eriksson back in the lineup over a younger guy, then so be it. Yeah, I think he even saw it in the infamous we ran a time article, which we'll get into after this. But he even said like Jake Virtanen, like he gets off to a slow start, but he's essentially like it was a shot at Travis Green. I read it as this guy needs to be in the lineup. But if you're Travis Green, why do you give a shit about Jake Virtanen at this point? You just got to win games. And if you can't be assured that Jake Virtanen is going to help this lineup, he's going to play a veteran.
Exactly. I think that Travis Green's kind of lame duck situation almost creates just so much desperation in his moves. He's going to do anything he can to try to win the next game. And having to juggle that while also having to juggle what seems like Jim Benning wanting him to play certain players over others, while also trying to juggle the fact that you hope that he's the coach of this team moving forward and developing relationships with all these players that can be counted on for years to come. it's a lot to do at one point, especially in the middle of this season, like we've never experienced before. And so I think that if they had a contract worked out for him, like you said, he could make more long-term decisions. He could take more time to make the decisions. He could take the time to get informed before making the decisions instead of having to try to rush. For example, throw Louis back in the lineup to try to get some defensive stability, or throw Vert back in the lineup and try to figure out a place for him to appease his higher ups.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just tease it. The Ben Kuzma article. It's already. I think it's already going to have a historical place in Canucks lore, just for that we ran out of timeline. But it was interesting that that do the Canucks have a PR staff? Like they couldn't see this his interview and be like, oh boy, this is not a good idea. So I'm assuming like this is good reporting. This is old school journalism by Ben Kuzma. He just essentially just phoned Jim Benning up and got him to admit on the record. And I think this part's a bit buried because obviously the big, line is we ran out of time, which is just hilarious. Come on. A GM, this guy's getting paid. I don't even know what his salary is, but this guy's getting paid very well to run a multi-million-dollar hockey team, and he ran out of time. Like, he can't delegate or anything like that. Like, he ran out. What the hell? Like, sorry, but the point that was made in the article that Jim Benning kind of admitted, I think got buried, was he essentially admitted that we we needed to move out salary. We needed to move out salary, which means like he's just admitted that he put this team in cap hell. Like, he needed to move some of his bad deals that he signed. Again, he's been here for 7 years. There's no bad contracts left on the books unless you want to consider maybe the Luongo cap recapture penalty, which is bullshit, obviously, but that against the Gillis regime. But everything else, all these contracts are Jim Benning's doing. So for him to admit on the record that he had to move out salary, he admitted that this Canuck team is in cap hell, is capped out because of his doing.
Exactly. And to be honest, I'd almost be more worried if he couldn't admit it by this point. Like, it's so clear and obvious by this point that the Canucks are in such a tough spot with their money because of the deals that he's given out, that if he was blind to that, I'd be even more worried.
Yeah.
But it is a frustrating scenario seeing that he's handicapped this team and now they're being forced to, they can't make the moves that they need to make because of all these big contracts they have on the books.
Yeah, and I think I was reading some reporting on the Athletic, that essentially the Canucks, they needed to buy out someone, and ownership said, no, we can't do that. And I guess some people, if you're a big time Benning stan, like, you can blame ownership and say, see, if they were allowed to buy out players, this would be a problem. But I mean, if you just don't have those contracts on the books in the first place, you don't have to resort to the buyout. And it is their money at the end of the day. They can say, oh, we don't want to buy out anyone. This has been tough times for everyone, even those guys, even though they got a lot of money. So
if you look at Benning's track record, like, if I'm ownership, I'm not even sure that if I grant him the buyout, that he's going to do the right thing with it.
Yes.
And that he's going to be able to buy out the right player and bring in the right players to replace it. And I think that that's got to factor into decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're Francesco Aquilini, you buy out Brandon Sutter. Who's to say he's not blowing this on, another Michael Furland? Like, it could be a similar situation to that. And I mean, Tyler Toffoli, when he scored those goals against the Canucks, the first game, I tweeted this out at the hat trick. It was just, again, Jacob Markstrom, right? He got to shout out his first game against the Vancouver Canucks. But I mean, no one really blamed Jim Benning for not signing that 6-year deal, right? I think everyone agreed. There's a general consensus that was a bit too rich for the Vancouver Canucks and for a goaltender. It's going to work. He's going to do. Markstrom's going to do well in Calgary for the first 2-3 years of that deal. I don't think there's any doubt. But after that, there's a big question mark. Even the same with Chris Tanev, 4-year deal. Chris Tanev's been an absolute warrior for this team, and a 4-year deal was good for him, but I don't think the Canucks should have signed that. But there's just something just so. And again, Jacob Markstrom got a shutout the first game against them, and that was a story. Absolutely, that was a big story. But again, there's something just so visceral and in your face about Tyler Toffoli scoring a hat trick against you, his first game back in Vancouver, when you could have had him, and it's on there. It's been reported by a bunch of people now. He wanted to come back, and a very good deal. I think 4 years, 4.25 at that, is very visceral in your face to say the cap situation for this team cannot be ignored any longer. This is a result of it. You let a guy like Tyler Toffoli walk for nothing on a very good deal because of your past indiscretions.
Yeah, and Toffoli comes back and scores all those goals, and it's finally kind of a concrete example of what these poor years of salary cap management have resulted in for the Canucks. And as you said, now it's been reported by multiple people that Toffoli wanted to stay, and that just kind of adds salt in the wound. It makes it even tougher to watch him succeed against the Canucks, especially when he's a guy that not only did the Canucks give up major assets for, but also he's a guy that stepped in immediately and showed immediate chemistry and
He
fit
looked
in like
awesome. He looked awesome.
yeah, he fit in like a glove. And so I think the fact that you think that they should have been able to keep him and that they paid such a price to get him, then it just doesn't make any sense why they weren't able to make that happen.
Yeah, it's absolutely frustrating if you're a fan of this team to see a guy like Toffoli walk. And I think that, when we have the post-mortem of the Jim Benning era, and I think that's going to come fairly soon, I think, a lot of people are going to look back at that as a tipping point, as the point where, enough was enough. And obviously the cap situation has come back to bite them.
Yeah, I agree. I think Toffoli scoring all those goals. I mean, he was leading the league in goals or tied for the lead at one point with almost all of his goals except for one just against the Canucks. And that's finally kind of like a stat or something that you can point at is be like, okay, this is enough is enough. Like you said, this is ridiculous. And it's clearly harming the team.
All right. Noah, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Much appreciated. Where can people find your work? Where can they follow you? This is your time to plug yourself right now.
Okay, follow me on Twitter, Noah Strang _ and read my work on Nucks Misconduct and anything I post on Twitter.
Yeah, no plug for Canucks Army. That's what I like to hear. Actually, I'm just joking. I like the guys over there. Again, Noah, thank you so much for coming on Power of the Talent. Hopefully we can have you on again sometime. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me on, and can't wait to come back.